Purview is a new service in Azure. It was announced 3 months ago on December the 3rd and is still in preview. So I guess let's just kind of shall I crack on now? Nick, I'll make it 6:30. So
yeah, go for it, Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
Right. Okay. So what is it? It's kind of like a primarily, I guess, a data governance, data discovery, classification kind of tool. But what does that mean, and what sort of problems are we trying to solve, really? So I think we would all recognize some of the challenges that organizations have managing their data today. In terms of there's more data, it's different types of data, it's coming in from different sources. It's not just our usual kind of operational data that we get from line of business applications. It's coming in from IoT solutions. It might be coming in from big data platforms that people have collected for analytics. And we may well have more and more data increasingly kind of as coming from SaaS-based applications as well. And so one of the kind of the key challenges around that is, well, you know, and this isn't a new challenge, is how do we bring some of those data sources together, and how do we overcome the operational silos? I guess the aim around all of that is organizations recognize that data is an important asset, but how can they make use of that asset faster? How can they get to making data-driven decisions much quicker, and perhaps more pertinently with exactly the right data? So how do they know where those particular data sources are? And increasingly, as we probably all remember back a couple of years with the rush up to sort of being compliant for GDPR, how do we make sure that we are complying with any industry regulations? How do we know what data is PII, and you know what data is sort of sensitive and sort of confidential to an organisation? And there are a number of different roles that we would recognise within companies today. You've got your analysts, you've got your data scientists. You may well have a role which is a data steward. You could have a chief data officer. You've probably got people who are focused on the security, and they will all have a kind of different perspective on what data governance means to them and what's important. So we really kind of, you know, what data do we have? Where does that data originate from? Where does it pass through? Can I trust it? What's my risk? You know, am I compliant with my usage? Who has access? Who has control of it? And what's required with regulation? These are all kind of questions that people will be asking when they start looking at the data that they got inside an organization and how they govern it. So I guess Microsoft's answer to some or all of those kind of those points really is a new service, Azure Purview, and there's kind of three key tenets around that. One is it's a unified solution, and we'll sort of dig into that a little bit. One is that it's hybrid, so it's, even though it's called Azure Purview, it's important to remember that it isn't only for Azure. It reaches back on premises into different clouds and into SaaS-based solutions as well. And it's open, so it's built on top of Apache Atlas and supports the Apache Atlas API. So things that you can't do today directly through the UI, you can do through the API, and we'll touch on some of those. So what, from a Purview point of view, are some of the things that we're trying to achieve? So I guess, you know, it's trying to have something that is fully managed, cloud native, available, you know, as a first party service through Azure, that can sort of manage and govern, you know, all those different types of data that we talked about earlier. Sort of purpose built, I guess, is quite important, you know, in sort of addressing these needs of different people across the organizations, whether that's sort of discovery or somebody who wants to gain insight and make sure, well, where are all of our sort of PII data attributes being stored? Is that in a SQL database? Is that in an Oracle database? Or is that actually stored in some file on a data lake somewhere or something like that? One of the other kind of key aspects, and I think this is primarily came out, well, from a product group point of view, came out of the work that Microsoft had to do to comply to GDPR a couple of years ago, is that looking at all of our own data, this cannot be a manual exercise. It has to be automated. It's just the volume of data just makes that manual element of it impossible to do. So it's got to be an automated process, and you've got to not only automate the discovery of data inside the sources that you pointed to, but also try and automate as much as possible the classification and attributes that you attach to the data that you discover. And then kind of key to all of this is, not only do you want to sort of discover and categorize all of that data, but you want to be able to trace the lineage. So if I take a piece of data out of SQL, for example, and I manipulate that using Data Factory, and I put it somewhere else into another SQL database, and then I do something else with it and put it somewhere else, perhaps in a file system, I need to be able to trace all of that and understand where attributes of that data go, which ones get dropped, and how data is joined together. So we'll take a look at the lineage as well. We also need to think about, I guess, who's interested in this. And I think within an organization, if they choose to kind of implement Purview, one of the key things around that will be making sure that the implementation and the rollout of that leads to a trusted data catalog. So, you really want to, I would guess, across an organization to have one. If you have multiple data catalogs, then that might be because you have different geographies or different business units that need to remain distinct. But I think the value comes if you can have one, and if the data within there it becomes a trusted source that everybody know has been through a process, a rigorous kind of process, and is kind of the correct and valid for people to sort of take a dependency on and use. And then finally, I guess, from an all-up point of view, there will be people inside an organization who will want to understand across the whole estate exactly what they have, what categories are being applied to that data, where the data for certain categories actually sits, the sensitivity and everything else that kind of goes with that. So this is what we're trying to do with Purview, bearing in mind this is a preview at the moment, so most of those kind of capabilities are already there today, but there'll be more to come as we go through the kind of the preview process, and then we kind of start to roll out the wider kind of product set. So at a high level, what does it actually look like? Well, I guess the key thing really is the data map. So this is the persistence layer. And this is where, when we reach out to the different data sources and we connect to those data sources and we scan and start to categorize, that information that we collect is put into the data map. And it's important to remember that all we're storing there is metadata. We're not actually storing any of the data that exists in the original data source. It's just the metadata about the data itself. And having built that data map, so essentially it's sort of a graph database of the relationships and the different attributes of the data, we can then build other tools on top of that. So that's where we sort of layer on top the data catalog, so we can do discovery and sort of come in and search and find and interact with the assets that are actually there within the data map itself, and the data insights on top of that as well, so that we can get that all-up view of exactly what we've got across the data estate. And I guess with time, we might see other ways of sort of using the assets within that data map itself. Excuse me. So at the stage that we're at now, which is sort of the public preview, then there's two sort of base kind of component layers to this. One is the platform itself, where the data map actually sits, and that's where the data comes from. The scanning and the classification gets pushed into the data map itself. And then on top of that is the UI that we get to interact with, which is the Purview Studio. And inside there, we've got the catalog and the data insights and the management layer, and a lot of the kind of the configuration elements that we need to sort of administer and interact with. And then on the right hand side of this particular side, you can see that we've got the open APIs. So We can use those to interrogate Purview itself, or push data in, query data, and whatever is supported within the Apache Atlas API. So hopefully that's sort of a quick 10-minute scene set of what Purview is. I thought now was to get into a demo. Just before I do that, are there any sort of burning questions that we need to tackle before we move on?
I was just wondering, I saw yesterday that Oracle was added to a list of support for Purview. I was wondering if you can go into that at all.
Yeah, so let me move forward a slide and then come back. So
sorry, dropped the gun.
No, that's fine. So I could just kind of put this afterwards because it was really about sort of the concepts really. But yeah, you're quite right. So at Ignite yesterday, we announced new capabilities really around sort of data sources. So what we can kind of connect to scan and classify and how we do that. And then there was also the business glossary up till now has been sort of a flat list. And now there's the hierarchical nature in the business glossary as well. I'm sure there'll be more as we sort of run through the rest of the preview process. Does that answer your question? So we've got Oracle, we've got SAP, Amazon sources as well in there. I think there's, from what I understand, there's plenty more to come. They're just not there and lit up at the moment.
Okay.
Anything else?
I think Manoj has put the hand up. Manoj, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sorry, I can't see that, Manoj.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
You okay? Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, right. I've been researching on the data, the Purview and the previous version of Purview, data catalog.
Yep.
To me, I'm a bit confused from the networking aspect of it. I'm not sure if you're going to cover it today on how that connects to your data sources. Like it's not available in UK South, but your enterprise is in UK South. Then how do you bring the connection in between? I'm a bit confused on that one. So if at some point, if you could address that, that would be very helpful.
Yep. Okay. So yes, if I haven't answered that by the end of the demo, or it's not clear, then chase me up again.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem at all. But you're right. I mean, I guess just to sort of do a little bit of that, because it's a preview, then the actual the actual sort of Purview service itself is only available in certain regions. On top of that, the way that we can scan is available in a few more regions on top, and I think that's in the documentation. But if you're connecting to data that is outside of those, then the scanning will be done from where your Purview instance is instantiated, and I'll show you where what the choices are currently. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you.
Anything else, Phil?
No, Paul, you're good to go.
Great. And can you see the demo environment? Yeah, great. Okay, so let's sort of run through a bit of a demo. So what we're looking at here is the Purview Studio environment with a home screen and sort of kind of quick links, I guess, to common things you'd want to do here in the center. You kind of get a little bit of a quick sort of highlight of what assets are in here. So this is this isn't my demo environment. This is one that we share across a whole load of people inside Microsoft. So most of the data sources and the assets in here are nothing to do with me. It's just kind of a shared resource. But if I wanted to set up my own, then let's just go. This is the kind of the control plane for the Purview environment that we're looking at the moment, which we've called this Contoso Purview. This is the kind of control plane inside there. So if I wanted to get into that studio environment, I can just come inside the Azure portal and hit this button here to go and launch the studio. I can go directly by going web.purview.azure.com, and then I'll get authenticated, and then you sort of land here. Before we sort of get into this, if I wanted to create a new one from scratch, then it's as you would for any other Azure environment. You just sort of come in here, hit create a new resource. You get asked a few questions, and there's not that many really at this point. So your subscription, resource group, what name you wanted to use for it, and then these are the regions where you can actually stand it up at the moment. So there's 2, 4, 6, 7 of those at the moment. And I guess as we get closer and closer to GA of the service, then we'll start to see that get rolled out across all of the Azure regions. Networking. So this is where you can specify whether you want to access this over a private endpoint or not. And then this is kind of the key thing from a configuration point of view. So really, there's not a lot to do in here at the moment. You're really just specifying the capacity units. And this is really about the sizing for the compute power for handling the data map itself. So it's either, at the moment, it's in 4 or 16. I would suspect that by the time we reach GA, then we'll have sort of more granular choices around that. This is really just sort of a manifestation of being in a preview state at the moment. So I won't hit new on that because that's only going to create a new environment. I'll go back to this one here. So with this, I guess if you think about the different people who are going to be interested in something that's providing a solution of metadata that you've got inside your organization, probably the majority of people are going to be looking for something. So sort of searching, in effect, searching the data map for the assets that have already been catalogued. So we can come in here into the center, and it's just sort of a very kind of familiar search experience. So I can just kind of type in customer, and we can see that not only are we going to search for things that have got customer in it, we're going to make some suggestions about where we might find it, and other things in here. But if we just hit customer, we can start looking now within the data map for all of the information that relates to customer, whether that might be a customer column within a table, whether it's the name of a table called customer, whether it's the name of a file that's got customer in it, anything at all. On the left-hand side, you can see that we've got a way of sort of slicing with this with the facets. So we can look at the results that we got over here by the different asset types. So in effect, where that's actually come from. So these relate to the different sort of data sources we've got at the moment. We can do that through classifications, and we'll spend quite a lot more time talking about classifications later. We can see who might have actually pushed that data in there. And then we can see from a glossary. So thinking in terms for glossaries, versus classifications. A glossary would be the business terms that an organization might use, where this classification would relate directly to the data itself. So I might have something that is related to my, finance team, and you might tag that as have a glossary term of finance. That might be different to something which you say is a profit and loss account or a credit card number or something else, which would be something that's classifying the actual data that we find. So over here, we have a list of all the places where we've actually found a customer, and just to kind of help drill down a little bit, let's search for stuff that's come from an Azure SQL database. And I'll drill into one that I sort of crawled and scanned in the other day, which is this customer table. So to keep things simple, this is just coming directly from the sample AdventureWorks schema inside my Azure SQL database environment. But you can see by actually drilling into an asset, this is the metadata that we've collected about this particular table inside Azure SQL. So not only do we have information about when it was created and modified and the actual kind of URL or a qualified name to get there, but we've also generated schema classifications, and this is all automated. So this is a part of the scanning process itself. So we can see that against this table, we have these series of classifications. If we go and look at the schema of the table itself, then we can start to drill down and see that here are the actual columns within that schema, and here are the automatic classifications that we've attributed. Now, some of these will be pulled through the name of the column. Other things might be pulled through the content of the column itself, so by sampling the data that's inside the table. Glossary terms are blank. So glossaries are things that you have to apply yourself. These aren't things that we can be automatically applied as part of the scanning process, and in the same way with the description. We can have contacts, so I did this, so this is kind of relates back to me, and I've added myself in as the owner. And we can see related, so because that customer table is part of a particular SQL schema, then when we scanned everything else in at the same time, we can see all the related tables that are part of that schema. And perhaps, the useful thing in here is, well, okay, how has this table actually been used? So I scanned in the table. I've also connected up Azure Data Factory, and I've got a number of jobs within Azure Data Factory that are using this customer table and just creating sort of random output tables. Nothing sophisticated here. It's just straight copies either into a different Azure SQL schema, or dropping these in as files within Azure Data Lake Store. But you can see that we can now start to build out a map. So the square edges are kind of the assets themselves, and then the rounded edges are here are sort of processes it's doing something to it. So in this case, it's just a copy activity from Azure Data Factory. But within this view, we can now start, and it's not a terribly sophisticated view, I have to say, but if I wanted to know, for example, where does email address go, we can see that by hovering over the schema on the left-hand side and picking out the different email addresses. So let's say this is information I'm interested in. How's this gone from my source table into other assets within the organization? Then we can start to drill in and see that across this lineage view. The other thing that we can do inside here is we can click on one of these other ones and say, well, okay, we can see, hopefully it's come over clearly on the screen, that this is in ADLS Gen 2, and I can switch that asset and kind of recenter my view on that particular asset. So now I'm looking at it from here. This is my file in the file system, and how does data get to here? So actually I have two jobs that just overwrite each other and write it out to this particular location. Hopefully that makes some sense. We can also do this. Let me just sort of flip back to the home page. I've got a slightly different example for finance. So we can also do lineage by pulling in content from Power BI. So that lineage view I'd done previously was using the assets that I'd scanned and Azure Data Factory. In the same way, we can go out and we can point at Power BI workspaces and then pull the information backwards from a Power BI workspace. So we can see here we've got a report that belongs to a dashboard, and if we go work our way backwards, we can see that this is a data set which comes from an Azure SQL database and comes from a piece of storage within the Data Lake Gen 2 storage location. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of searching for assets. What might you do with those things? Well, if it was a table, you might decide to open that in Power BI. The other thing that you can do is, this might be one nice way of sort of finding things within this kind of catalog. But longer term, you won't necessarily want everybody to be coming here to find something, finding out where it is, who the owner is, what the location is, so you can get access to it. You might want to sit inside, something like Azure Synapse, and actually do it from inside a different environment completely. So this is the Synapse environment. Inside here, I might be working with tables, or I could be working with files in the file system. And the search now in here is hooked up to Purview, so that I can search for a customer within Azure Synapse. And we can see that I get exactly the same UI inside here that I was getting inside the Purview Studio environment. So I can say, okay, let's have a look at Data Lake Store. This would be my storage account. So here's my file that I've generated as an output. If I click on that, The difference inside here is that now you can connect and do different things with these things. So you can take that asset you found from the Purview catalog, in effect, and now bring this in and create a new data flow with inside Synapse, or create a link service, or bring it into a data set and other things inside here. So I think that's pretty useful. You can do exactly the same with inside Azure Data Factory. So if you come into Azure Data Factory, we've got Purview wired up here. And the way that you do this in Synapse is you just come into Management, Purview account, and then point it at the Purview service that you've set up. I'll just pause there. Any questions?
I've got one. Just to determine the lineage, does the time you scan the data, does the data factory have to be active in order to track? Or I was just wondering if you had some data where Data Factory had done its job and then got deleted.
No, so it's a really good question. So this here. So this is the Data Factory job that I'm using to sort of take the data that was in the table and generate the files as an output. It's just a copy activity. But the copy activity is a for each loop, and there's nothing in here that really kind of tells you what it's actually doing. The way that it works is it looks at the pipeline runs. And so inside here, this is what's happening, and it's using this information to determine what the source and what the destination is. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's I guess the key thing here is it's not looking at the static pipeline that you've authored. It's looking at the dynamic pipelines that get run. So, well, not dynamic. It's looking at the pipelines that get run and in effect what it's doing there. And the way that you wire that up is back in Purview itself. You come into the management center and you have to specify the data factory that you want it to connect to in here. So you can see this is mine linked. We don't see any of the others because they're nothing to do with me. So I cannot access those, but this is the only one that I've got, which is the one that I've just shown you here. So by connecting this up, when we then do the next run, Purview will look back and will pick up the runtime information. Okay, so that's sort of the discovery, finding assets, doing something with them. How do I get stuff in there, I guess, is kind of the next stage, certainly where I started. So the sources. This is a little bit messy, bearing in mind that there's probably dozens of us across Microsoft using this all at the same time at the moment. There's two views inside here. There's this table view, which you can kind of sort, or there's a map view. The map view is quite nice, apart from the fact I can't search and find something at the moment. So hopefully that will change, but I know. So you just have to excuse me scrolling across, but I know that my stuff is over here. So what I've done is created a collection, which is really just a container. And inside there, I've just put things that I'm interested in playing around with. So this is the database AdventureWorks. This is the one that I was searching for a minute ago. But you can come in here and you can either create a new collection, and you kind of associate it with this, so have sort of a parent-child relationship, or you can register some new sources. So this is where we start to see the data sources expand. So we've got Oracle in here, we've got SAP, Teradata. This is where you connect to Power BI. I've just been using SQL and Data Lake Store just to play around with it. So inside here, I can hit the SQL, continue, specify my server name. That gives me the endpoint, and then this is the important thing, which collection I want that new source put into. And if I hit OK here, I can register that. Now, at that point, it just knows about it as a data source. But what you then want to do is start to think about setting up a way of sort of scanning across that. So if I show you the one that I already have, so this is the one that I scanned and found earlier. You can see that I can see how many times it's scanned and whether it's successful or not. I can either create a new one, can edit my source in here, which is just the same thing that I showed you a minute ago, or I can come in and have a look at the scans that I've already done. So this is what it did. I've done it a number of times while I've been playing around. I can edit this scan. And what we're doing in here is we are connecting to that data source, but we also need to provide it some credentials. And all the credentials that we use inside Purview come from Key Vault. So if I just sort of back up a little bit here, bearing in mind I've now got that data source registered, but I now need to give it credentials to allow it to scan across that data source. So the way that you do that is you get into the management center, you specify credentials, you specify your key vault. So this is the one that I've set up here. So my PW credentials is my key vault, which I specified outside of the Purview environment. And then the next thing I've had to do is come in here and create some new credentials. So I've got one for my SQL Server, which is just a straightforward SQL Server account. So there's a SQL account name, and then the password is secured by Key Vault with a secret. And you can do exactly the same for all the other data sources. So I've got one for Data Lake Store, but you do need to do that before you can sort of get back to your data sources. Just need to.
We do have a question, Paul. Which is, can you do CDS or Dataverse from Daniel?
Not that I've seen at the moment, Daniel. So these are the only ones that are there. I can't remember whether it's on the roadmap list or not. I don't know for sure, but it would make sense certainly in the long term. Any other, Nick?
No, that's the only one at the moment.
Okay, great. So yeah, let's go back to how we sort of scan these details. So here's our the details. So that's a different one. AdventureWorks. So this is the scan that I've completed on this. If you edit this scan, we've set up the credentials, and now we say, what are the things we're actually looking for? So these are the tables I elected to do, and this is probably one thing you need to think about when you're playing around with this, is that the more tables that you do, the more verbose you make your classifications that you're looking for, the longer those scans are going to take, and there's probably, there will be a cost associated with that in terms of compute time. So when we're scanning, we sort of apply a scan rule set, and there's a default one, which is this Azure SQL database one. I'll remember the name for later. But if we look inside that, then there are 105 built-in system rules or scan rules that are going to get applied. So these are all things like credit card numbers, it could be passports, date of birth, that kind of stuff, personal information. So there are scan rules for each and every one of these, so that it would look across the data sources and see whether that's there. And that's how we get those classifications when we looked at the asset through the search kind of capability. I can add my own, so I can create custom rules at this point and add those in, and I can create my own custom scan rule sets. So if I didn't want to use the default one, if I wanted to use something that is much more specific or relates to me or some of my own custom classifications, then I can do all of that, set that running, and I can either set it to go on a recurring schedule or I can do one-time activity. Once you've got all that set up and you've done this scan, that's how you basically populate the data map with data from your data sources. Hopefully that makes some sense. So let's just kind of flip forward and look in the management center, and inside here, what we've got is, well, what are we actually searching for? Where did the scan sets and the classifications come from? And this is where you find all of that information. So those 105 built-in ones are here with a namespace of Microsoft.government or Microsoft.financial or something like that. And these are all built into Purview today, and I'm sure there'll be more in the future as well. If I wanted to have custom ones, and I can do that, and you can see that plenty of people have been playing around with this. But we can now start to look for things. So this is one I created, which is just a default sort of classification. There's nothing sophisticated in here. It's really kind of a grouping area, I guess. But once we've got that, then we can create our own classification rules and add in the classifications that we want. And it's those things that get applied when we run the scans. So there's sort of a bit of a hierarchy of things of classification rules, and then that all getting pulled together within a scan rule set. And we can either build those up, which are our custom ones, or if we look in the scan rule sets, then we see all of the default system ones. And this is the one that I was applying earlier to my Azure SQL database. So I just essentially use the default. You'll also notice while we're in here, then if we wanted to connect out to data sources outside of the ones that I've been using, so the Azure ones, so if we wanted to connect to SQL Server on premises or Oracle or something like that, then we're going to be using an integration runtime. So that's exactly the same kind of concept as we would be doing with Azure Data Factory. What else have we got? So metrics are in there, aren't they? So this is where I've shown this pointing at Data Factory or Data Share, and the credentials I've already covered. So let's have a look quickly at Glossary. So Glossary is the terms that a business might apply to the data that's inside here. So they are sort of arbitrary, I guess, in many ways, but there'll be things that the individual businesses would understand. So it might apply, if you were pulling data through from SAP, for example, you might have a glossary term, which is SAP, that you could apply to the asset so that when you search via the glossary, you could find all the things that were in your data map that related to SAP. And you can have one or many of those glossary terms applied to an asset. It's really just entirely up to you. There are a whole system, a whole number in here already as kind of system defaults, but again, in a similar way to the sort of the classifications, we can create new terms. So we get inside here with a new term, there's a system default, and inside there, you can see these are the terms, so essentially the name attribute pairs that you're expected to sort of fill in for a system default. Or you can create your own term templates. So this is the system one that I've just sort of shown you here, which has got these attributes, and I can create a custom one, do a new term type. So, and then I'd start putting in my own template name. So I could have, maybe for the particular thing I wanted, I might only want to have 4 or 5 terms, or it could be more verbose. So if you were doing it by different source systems, one might need all 9 terms, another one might, need only half a dozen or something like that. But that's the glossary. As we said just before we started the demo, then this is now hierarchical. So if I create something inside here, we edit this, you'll start to see this is related and has child terms and things like that. Actually, I've gone into the child, so I should have gone into the parent, but you get the idea. So if we go into there, we should start to see the children underneath all of that. So you can build hierarchies of glossary terms. It gets get a structure that makes sense for you. And then I guess finally, in the last few minutes, is we were talking earlier about kind of the different roles. So you're going to have people who want to sort of search across these assets. You want to find and discover things they know exist inside the organization, they just don't quite know where. Probably going to have other people who are responsible for administering and setting this up and getting it connected to data sources and making sure it's being scanned and nothing's going to go wrong. And then there'll be other people who are more interested in that holistic view across everything that we have inside an organization. Where does it sit? What type of data is it? How we classified all of that. So at the moment, the insights area here gives you a number of different views, which is essentially is really just a different way of looking inside that data map and sort of breaking down all the data and the relationships we've got inside there. So we can look at assets, and you can see that within this environment we've got 162 Azure SQL databases identified. We've got stuff coming in from Amazon S3. It's got stuff coming in from Teradata. Majority that's been catalogued is coming in from the data lake store. We can see the scans, so just success and failure. It's relatively straightforward at the moment. We get a different view of the glossary. So we saw that glossary in that hierarchical format when we wanted to sort of interact and create it. Here we can now see, how often things are being used, and perhaps more pertinently is with those glossary terms, how many terms have we got that have no assets associated with them? So are we creating things in our glossary that actually we're not actually using and we should use? So you start to see what's missing. With the classifications, so we've got 105 built-in classifications in those sort of 5 buckets in effect, so government and financial and stuff like that. But if I wanted to drill into this and sort of say, well, okay, let's have a look at our categories. Let's have a look into here for files. And actually, now we can start to see that if we look at credit card number, which is in the financial category, we've got 59 files where we expect to see a credit card number. We can now go and browse those assets. In effect, what this is doing is sort of taking you back to that search view, but it's sort of pre-selecting all of the different filter terms for the facets so we can see it's all within those files. It's actually added in SQL database as well. That's why we've got 59 before. But it's adding in the asset types, and then down here it's adding in the classification. So you could get there from the search view that we had earlier, but it's kind of nice to just go directly from the insights and arrive straight there. A final couple of things. So sensitivity labels inside here. So if you are using Office 365 and Microsoft Information Protection and setting up sensitivity labels for your documents that you're storing inside sort of SharePoint and OneDrive and things like that, then you can pull those. If you are on the Office 365 side of things, you can now associate that with Purview and then pull that into the Purview environment. I don't have access to that through this demo environment here, so it's empty, but you can definitely do all of that. And that's probably it. It's a bit of I thought I'd have plenty of time in sort of 45 minutes, but it becomes a bit of a whistle-stopped tour. Are there any questions?
There aren't any in chat yet. I don't know if people want to put their hand up or put them in chat or if they don't have any. Yeah, we've got...
Anything need to go back to?
Did again, yeah.
I've got one for SaaS. So if you want to check out data for a SaaS product, does it sort of scan the API, or does it actually go to the SaaS database to scan the data?
So SaaS as in SaaS Analytics product?
SaaS meaning like Salesforce.
Oh, sorry, right, yeah. So either it will be, eventually it'll be there as part of our, let's just go back to that. So when we're looking at sources register, it'll either turn up here eventually, yep, as one of the SaaS kind of data sources that you want to get to. If it's not there at the moment, then you can use the Atlas API to essentially call the REST API there and take the data that you have and push that into the Purview data map. So we've got I've got one of my other customers who the metadata about the stuff that they do is stored within a different environment. They don't use Data Factory, for example. So they're going to look at doing that, is sort of extracting their metadata and using the API to sort of push that information into the data map. If you're going to SaaS-based product, there's probably an API you can call to get that information that you're interested in. Then you'd have to call the Atlas REST API to push that into Purview today, without having a native way of doing it.
Thank you.
We got another question from Stuart, which another roadmap question really around things like local VMs, SharePoint, OneDrive, and things like that.
Yeah, I can't really. I'm not part of the product group, so I can't really speak to what's in order on their roadmap, I'm afraid. I think the intention is to get to as many different data sources as possible.
Yeah, I think it is as well. Yeah.
We're sort of 3 months into a preview, and we've just had our first kind of rev, I guess, of additional data sources. But that does remind me, if somebody's interested in doing more with Purview, then you can request to participate in an upcoming Purview preview feature. So this would be really where you'd start to find out that kind of information. But I think it would mean that you would already be sort of trying it out, because you'd need to provide your tenant ID of where you've got your Purview environment today. So it's not just for, you've got to be an active participant, I guess, in that process. But this is available for people to do.
And we've got another question from Jordan relating to the relationship with Azure Information Protection.
Yes. So that comes with the sensitivity label. So information protection provides the sensitivity labels. So if you wanted to say something was company confidential, or the labels that you've got specified inside there, then within IPM you set that up and you associate that with the Purview classifications. There's quite a good just trying to think where it is. There's quite a good video that one of the product team has done of exactly that process. So I can probably find that and add that into the chat later on.
Okay, cool. Any more, or should we go to the break? Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much. That was really useful for me as well. Thank you.
Saves me talking to you privately later in the week then. All right. Yeah, no problem at all.